So what I want to make something clear about is that you had enough revenue at that point to hire somebody. Is that where we eventually got to the point where you're like, okay, I have enough money here and I'm just crazy and I'm still choosing to do the work, but I could hire somebody, but that means I don't make as much money, or that means that the company isn't as profitable, and that's going to fuck with my ego a little bit, and I'm going to hurt because it's like I have extra cash I can go fuck around with and do certain things. Is that what it actually is like for you at that moment?
100%. And it really was the ego part too, right? Like I can do this myself. Like, why do I need to hire anybody else to help me with this? Mm-hmm. Right? Thinking, oh, well, I can do it better. Why would I hire somebody else? All these things that you think, right? And you're like, no, like you will never, ever be able to grow and scale beyond that. If you think that way.
Sure.
Okay. So a lot of it is putting your ego down and saying, hey, like, yeah, I need help. And let me see how I can get there as quickly as possible without me having to pull my hair out.
I was thinking about this, funny enough, as we were, I always say we now. I'm glad I always say we, because I never make it about I, because I'm always thinking about like language.
I do the same thing. I think in sales, I don't know what it is, persuasion, whatever it is, but I do the same thing.
I think I learned it from a mentor of mine that said it just sounds better. It's less centering around a verbal way of communicating. It's all about me versus it's about us type of thing. And I'm like, oh, that always stood out to me. And so even though there was no we earlier, I was driving, as I just challenged my own thought there over here. And I was like, I want to kind of kick this thing off with when I first met Joni, which was in person in Houston. And we had a great event together. We got to know each other there. But then she takes us out to this just bitchin' cool Mexican restaurant in downtown Houston. And she's like the queen. You're like the queen. We roll up. The owner has her a special parking spot. He's got the big table in the back laid out for what, 15 of us maybe? It was a pretty big party, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a big party. And he's just loving on us as a group. And I'm thinking, man, this Joni's kind of badass. This Joni got it going on now.
VIP.
Totally. So that was quite fun nonetheless. But obviously, your entrepreneurial journey is special. I've had a great privilege of being able to spend a lot of time with you now. And a lot is relative, but enough time to understand what your journey has provided for you. And I think it's admirable from a lot of different vantage points. And obviously you had me on the podcast many, many months ago. I'm grateful for that as well. So I appreciate you and your husband over there. But I think from a kickstart point, as I always do, I like to get brought up to speed here from maybe some things I missed or haven't had the pleasure of communicating with you about in this time that we've known each other. But everybody has a story, and everybody's story is unique. And so take us on the journey, because I know you've shared with me kind of what your starting point was and flipping and real estate and where it's led you to this point. But give us the ramp up period so we can know how it got you to today. And then I will take over from there and we'll have a little fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, Manny, everyone has a story, right? And so for me, it actually started out when I'm a young child, really came from actually pretty rough upbringing. Father was a heroin addict. My mother finally left him, and she was a single mother working 2 jobs to support my brother and I. And so and when I say she was, working hard to support us, I mean, she had 0 free time. She had her 9-to-5 job, worked her way up as a supervisor, and then she managed a McDonald's at, graveyards and on the weekends. Wow. And so my brother and I would go hang out with her at McDonald's on her graveyard shift, right? Playing in the McDonald's playhouse with those little like clowns, whatever, Ronald McDonald things, right?
The one benefit.
Yeah. And I just saw how hard that woman worked. And when I was 15 years old, I was like, you know what, like, I gotta like provide some things. Like I gotta get a job, start providing for myself, buy myself some clothes, shoes, all the things that I wanted, right? Because I didn't want that woman to work anymore. I mean, and then she already had to. And so 15 years old, I got a job, and then first in my family to go to college. And at 19 years old, I was renting my own apartment and working a couple jobs just to try to support myself through college. And it was funny because I saw this late night infomercial show on real estate investing. I was studying for a biology test, And this real estate infomercial comes on. It's about flipping houses and, you know, using little to no money down. I'm like, crap, that like spoke to me. I'm like, you know, I don't have to work as hard as my mother did, right? Like if let me check this out, see what it was all about. And so I did. Went to a 3-day seminar on real estate investing. And then after that, it was like, man, this is what I really wanted to do for a living. So in college, I was actually flipping houses, you know, just to provide, you know, for myself. Made a pretty good living doing that. And then once I graduated, I started actually buying pre-foreclosure homes. So actually knocking on pre-foreclosure doors, making agreements with homeowners. And that was exciting to me. That for the first time, I found like what my passion was. My passion was sales, negotiating, building relationships with people. And I just loved it. I thrived on that. And I did that for about 10 years, made some really, really good money in my 20s and 30s buying pre-foreclosure properties. And then what happened in 2008, the market kind of shifted and I was like, oh shit, Joni, like, what are you going to do? Right. Like you were no longer you couldn't flip as you were prior. And so I had this moment of what do I do? And so I had no choice but to pivot my model. And so I started selling my investment properties to investors. And then I would lease them out and then professionally manage them for them. So then I ended up starting a property management company out of nowhere and grew that now to about 2,300 doors, which is a pretty successful business now. But had I not pivoted my model back then, I don't know if I would have been here today, right? So yeah, that's kind of the background of my story.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think you're a sweetheart, and you shared with me the other day, I think that you are somewhere still actively owning, was it over 100 current properties that you have? Is it over 100 or was it just under? I forget.
It's right at 100
Okay.
rental properties that we own.
Got it. So Joni still owns 100 rental properties for you all right now. They're like, oh, so, you know, let's hear some of the deets. And you are growing the property management company, but that's not it. You also own several other companies as well that work in conjunction and in parallel with the property management company as well. Plus, you have a company that is a virtual team member placement company. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. So you're right. So I have 2 property management companies, and then I have a plumbing company, which kind of services the property management companies. And then I've actually built my businesses using virtual assistants. And so I have about 30 virtual assistants that work in my companies. And so I had an opportunity to purchase a virtual assistant company from actually one of our good friends, Steve Rosenberg. And I took that and I was like, you know what, I have a vision for this, and started working with other business owners to help them place their virtual assistants in their businesses as well. So pretty cool concept. Love that business. Love helping, you know, business owners kind of grow and scale to their next level as well and grow other businesses.
So, okay. I have some selfish thoughts and questions that I want to ask about. You're clearly a person that likes the game of business. It's like, oh, hey, let's spin off a business over here. Let's start up this one over here. And clearly you make them work to become successful. I'm not saying that doesn't or hasn't come without its set of failures. I'm sure there's a long list of those. But what about is it in business that you attribute fun or some sort of game to this so that it doesn't beat you and you're able to beat it? Because business is not an easy game, right? And I think that you defy a lot of the, and I'm not saying this from a space of a downside, but you're very calm-mannered, right? Maybe you got some of that Latina fire in you, though. So so it's just
you
not
haven't seen it yet, man.
Yeah. Totally. But you know, there's something that inside of you allows you to execute and do these businesses and make them work. And so I'm trying to pinpoint what some of that stuff might be, if you understand where I'm kind of going with this. And so maybe you could shed some light and share with us that part of you and who you are and how it applies to you making success out of businesses when the vast majority of other people can't figure it out.
Yeah. So part of me and who I am is I've always been the type of person to get shit done. That's just how I've always been.
Come on now.
Sorry. And that's just me. And so, building these businesses, I didn't overthink things, right? I think a lot of times people overthink, like, let's get everything right. Let's get all the processes and systems and everything right, which I think is important, yes, to an extent, right? But I think that kind of, for a lot of people, they can't get past that. And so they never get past moving the needle or moving their business and growing and scaling it because they don't have that mentality. And for me, like, I knew, okay, if I want to grow this thing, I need people, right? Like, I need smart people too. Like, I don't care. I had to put my ego down and say, you know what, Joni, you are not the smartest person. And I'm okay with that. There are smarter people on my team that are helping me grow and scale. It's their ideas, and I'm kind of steering the ship. And so I think for a lot of your listeners listening to this, like, don't overthink it, right? Like, just freaking get started. Yes, it's not going to be perfect. And that's why you hire smart people to perfect it if you want it as you grow and scale.
Sure. Makes a lot. Yeah, of course it does. I mean, I love the don't overthink it part. I think that is a crutch and a crippling effect that unfortunately harms a lot of people. So give me the idea here, okay? So now I want to get more into like the tactical part of it. So let's just say you're literally talking about bringing in the right person and you are getting going. I think these little nuances are really where people have to understand what it is that you just said to make it probably more clear, which is, okay, well, just don't overthink it. But now you got to hire somebody and they're smarter than you, but you don't feel like you're good enough to hire them, or maybe you don't have the money to hire them yet. How do you make some of these decisions, Joni? Like, how do you filter through what's next, what's right about what's next? Again, maybe the thought is don't overthink it, just do it. You're going to make some mistakes and fuck up, and that's just the way it's going to be, which is probably the best thing you could do. But is there a better way to optimize for that in some sense?
Yeah, you are gonna you're gonna mess up. That's the nature of this. Like, it's taken me, freaking a lot. I've been in this 23 years and I've messed up a lot, but I didn't have that fear to say, you know what, like, oh gosh, like, I messed up, so I'm just gonna hang it up and start something else, right? You keep at it. You just, plow through, and yeah, if it's not working, then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, like, what is not working, right? And figure that piece out and offer solutions to figuring that piece out. And for me, like, early on, yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of money, but what I realized is when I got to a certain point in my business, and I was in my property management company, I was at like 500 doors, right? And I was doing everything in my business. I was the salesperson. I was the one handling all the coordinating of the maintenance. I was, handling tenant relations, all of that. And I realized that, like, I didn't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. Like, I had to do something, right? And so then that's when I started hiring virtual assistants to do a lot of that day to day to get stuff off my plate so that I can focus on the higher level stuff, right? So that's one way you can keep your costs down. I mean, if you feel you don't have a whole lot of money to invest in, like, start there, right? And then as you are able to get yourself out of the day-to-day, then eventually you'll be able to hire that smart person in-house, if you like, which is what we did. Yes, it was an investment up front, but the VAs really helped us get to that point so we could grow and scale and had enough funds to be able to hire that right person.
Sure. Does what I'm about to say next make sense to you? So you're doing all the work. You did it at 500 doors. And then clearly, so what I want to make something clear about is that you had enough revenue at that point to hire somebody. Is that where we eventually got to the point where you're like, okay, I have enough money here and I'm just crazy and I'm still choosing to do the work, but I could hire somebody, but that means I don't make as much money, or that means that the company isn't as profitable, and that's going to fuck with my ego a little bit, and I'm going to hurt because
Bingo.
it's like I have extra cash. I can go fuck around with and do
Yeah.
certain things. Is that what it actually is like for you at that moment?
100%. And
Okay.
it really was the ego part too, right? I can do this myself. Like, why do I need to hire anybody else to help me
Mm-hmm.
with this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Thinking, oh, well, I can do it better. Why would I hire somebody else? All these things that you think, right? And you're like, no, like you will never ever be able to grow and scale beyond that
Mm,
if you think that way.
sure.
Okay. So a lot of it is putting your ego down and saying, hey, like, yeah, I need help. And let me see how I can get there as quickly as possible without me having to pull my hair out.
And you're basically saying, if you don't understand this mentality, then Joni, do you agree with this or disagree with this? That you're not a real entrepreneur then if you're not willing to part ways with the idea that you have to be the one doing it all, and that if you have the cash to do it, because there's a difference between this, right? So I think is it clear that there's a difference between you're doing it all and you have the money and you're just crazy for continuing to do it all versus you are doing it all and you still don't have the money, which means you got to focus on making the money still, right? Which you really got to
Right.
get to a point where you can afford to start to hire people,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. You're not an entrepreneur then. You just basically created a job for yourself.
Right. Yeah. But you parade around as like you're a business owner. You're like,
Yeah,
well, yeah,
exactly.
you own a job.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think that's, that's a difficult place to be in the sense that most people don't know how to give up what they feel like took them so long to get to in terms of that thought again of how do I go and part ways with this money that I have to then hire the next person to come in, and do I have the identity necessary to support that part of the process, right? Because it sounds like from your point of view, you were able to make that switch. Now, do you also agree or disagree that if I go out and hire these people, but I don't go out and focus on the higher leverage activities still, which I can imagine, and I'm very curious what your answer is going to be, is to do more revenue generating things? Or where do you start to shift where you're focusing there? And that obviously it's probably specific to your business, which I'm curious just to know that answer too. But if you go hire people and then you don't do anything, well, then you're technically kind of still wasting your time to some extent and wasting the money because you haven't necessarily gone and replaced what you were doing or not doing with something that's more productive.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I want to talk because you talked a little bit about support too, right? And I want to say that number one, it's not me that is, building this business all by myself. Like I have a great support system. My husband is building this business right alongside me.
Right.
So, I think that's important to have that support system because, our mind plays games with us, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
will tell us like, hey, yeah, you're not good enough. You can't do that. You can't, grow to this certain level, right? And so I think having that support system really helps because, for me personally, I know like if I'm having a bad day, my spouse, my partner is going to lift me up and say, Joni, you got this, right? You
Mm,
can do this, like go push through. Okay. And so I think that's one aspect of it is really having that support system, right?
right.
And then when you do have that support system, it helps you to write out like, what are your goals? Like, what's your vision? What does that look like? Right? Because if you have no vision, then how do you expect to hire anybody and have that person, kind of drive that business forward as well if you have no vision? I think a lot of entrepreneurs get in this not knowing like where they actually want to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think it's important that you sit down and write out a vision for your business and how are you in some of your goals, right? And how are you going to get there?
Very true. And by the way, you jumped the gun and beat me to bringing in your hubby because I was going to bring him in at some point here
Oh,
and
sorry.
let
When
you
you
talk
call,
about.
you talked about, support and I mean that's a big part of it because honestly, I mean I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without that support. I mean, you see me, I go to events and
Yeah.
and I'm able, and that's the thing too, is like my skill set is building relationships, sales. And so I know that's where I need to be. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the lane that I need to stay in because honestly, guys, we are all probably only good at one thing, maybe a few things, right? And I think that so many of us try to focus on all different aspects, like pick your lane, choose what your unique ability is and drive success using that.
I'm getting excited now because you're bringing up some big topics. Okay, so are you advising them to in the early days as well? Because this can go a few different ways, which I've heard different schools of thought, Joni. I've heard that in the beginning, like you said a few minutes ago, you might have to wear all the hats, and you're like, oh shoot, I have to learn this thing. Or are you saying, hey, for us with my hubby and I, we were able to actually complement each other. I was good at X, Y, and Z. He was good at A, B, and C. And so maybe it is, you're looking for a partner, maybe not a life partner, but just a business partner. Maybe it is a life partner because there's more of those that seem to be out there doing it nowadays where there are complementing skill sets where they're not the same. So each can go work on their own thing. What's your perspective on that? Because that can get very confusing fast, depending on timing, I think, of when you're hearing that. So for right now, it makes sense that you guys are probably doing your own independent versions of what you two do best in the business. But at the beginning, was it the same way?
Absolutely.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I mean, at the very beginning, so we were very aligned. We had the same vision. We had the same goal. So I think that's also extremely important in a partnership or, and with your spouse is that you guys are aligned. And you have the same visions and goals, right? And so we went to this boot camp together at 19 years old.
That's awesome.
Right? And we wholesale properties together. And so quickly we knew what both of our skill sets were. I love talking to people. I love, negotiating and the sales part of it. And he loved the finance part of it, so he would quickly analyze the deal and say, hey, Joni, like, this is where we need to be. You go do it. And I would go do it, right? And so we worked together as a team so well. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we grew and scaled as quickly as we did. It's because we worked so well together and we complemented and we used our skill set to really drive us forward. So absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. And obviously, so from then, that's been a long run now, obviously, and I'm not dating you for any reason or saying that you're older by any means, but it's clear that it's possible then to involve your spouse with you in business, and you all have done a great job. And okay, so talk to us about where it's been hard in those moments, because then you're building a business together. How long before you get married? When did you get married? You didn't get married around 19, did you?
Oh, no. So I was 23 when I got married.
Well, that wasn't long after.
Yeah, not long after, but so we were in New Mexico. So that's where we started our careers, in New Mexico. And so we moved here in 2005. Into Texas. We didn't have any kids, nothing. It was just us two. And we were committed. Let's just work hard. Right. And so, we moved to Texas together and bought pre-foreclosure homes, did all that before we actually had kids. And so, and when we had kids, obviously things changed, right? Because now we can't work as hard. Now we, our goals are a little differently. So we had to realign ourselves. And so, yeah, to your point, Manny, it was difficult because, when you work together, you take things home with you. And so there are times where, I remember like carrying my baby to knock on pre-foreclosure doors, wow. and those sorts of things. And at some point you're like, okay, like enough is enough. Like we've built it, we've grown it to where we need to. Now we can go ahead and have the team do a lot of that. And it took a long time to get there, but once I realized like, hey, my focus needs to be when I'm home with my children, right? And so phones go away. We don't talk business anymore. But that was probably the hardest part, is taking things home with us at night, right? And on the weekends.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad you brought up the kids thing, because that's going to get me even another layer excited here. Obviously, we just had a baby. Not
super cute.
Yeah, he's every day he gets more handsome. He gets it from his dad. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
From his mama, I'm sure.
I know. Of course, mama's beautiful too. So we got very fortunate there. So, because I'm in this, right? So like I'm at the point now where we're building our business. Obviously, I come out and do once a month with you guys, and it's a beautiful blessing in itself. But our business is evolving. We just had a young man. My wife and I are not in business together, but we are in a very good relationship where she owns the parenting side of it, more on the daily duty of being mom and parent, while I'm building the business. But you said something there that caught my attention, which was you had to realign once you got kids, once they had come into your life. What was that really like for you in the sense like, okay, because I'm just like more about the like, how did you do it type of thing, in sense that you were working really hard, you were grinding it out young, and then the kids come along and all of a sudden you have to shift. That was not easy, I can imagine, because it wasn't easy for me. And I'm sure it doesn't ever change, because then you really have to take time away from building this thing you really want to, which is your business, because you have a young son or daughter now. And so how do you go about all that? What was that process like for the two of you?
Yeah. So one book that I highly recommend that I think you should really read is The Family Boardroom.
Oh,
Um,
I've never heard of that. I
Now
like that.
that book really changed my life and how I saw things. And most importantly, like having designated date nights, right, with my husband. And having those when your kid gets old, I mean, right now, your child's like a couple months old, but
He's gonna be two here pretty soon. It seems like it, but
yeah,
yeah, feels.
yeah,
But I feel like it's all part of the same phase, zero
but
to a couple of years.
yeah. So, I mean, we run EOS in our business, right? And so, which is the entrepreneur operating system. So a lot of entrepreneurs know that term, but the same concept of running our business and what we do in our business, we kind of do that in our family side of things too. So, we have our date nights with each other. We have
Mhm.
our date nights with our kids. I think it's important to have a date night with your kid, so you have that one-on-one time, right? And we also have meetings as a family to
Yep.
say, okay, like what are our goals as a family? So you and your wife could have meetings to say,
Yep.
okay, like, what are our goals?
Totally.
Just together,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's important that you have that structure, because yes, like as you're building your business, things just get crazy and busy. And when you go home at night, you're like, man, I just want to like lay down on the couch and not do anything, right? But then your wife's at home all day long, and all she wants to do is talk, right? And so it's important that you have that time for yourself, so that way you guys grow together as a couple.
Sure. Yeah, we do something like that every Saturday. We come together. We talk about. We've got a framework that we follow there. So we track very well on that, and we've evolved tremendously in that category. Um, how about for you when it was the I'm pregnant, we're having kids, and I'm still a business person? How did that affect how you approached business back before you could go towards the family days? Because I'm sure that's evolved now. Obviously, the kids are a lot older, so that's a little different. But what about the early grinding days when baby's just baby and it's just like, just needs you to feed it and make sure it's sleeping well and change some diapers, and then what? Like you said, you're out knocking on doors. Like, what's that day like? What are those days
Yeah.
like for you when that happens?
My husband thought I was completely nuts because so like the day of, that I actually had a scheduled C-section.
Hmm.
I'm actually working at the hospital on the computer, right? Like getting some emails out
Go
and,
figure.
kind of working on some things to make sure that the schedule for my maintenance coordinators were, they knew what to do. And he's like, Joni, you need to put that computer down. You're about to have a baby. And so it was, even when I had that baby, it was just nothing but grinding. I had that kid at my office. I had the playpen here, and the office staff would come in and kind of help with that. And I was still knocking on doors. So it was still a grind.
Wow. Wow.
But what's cool is that, so my kids have now realized that mom and dad work really hard. And I think
Mm,
that's important for them to see that side of us, that yes, like we are grinding. Because today, I mean, I think the generation today of kids, they don't want to work,
mm.
and so my son's already asking to go get a job, which,
That's
I think
awesome.
it's important for them to understand the value of hard work. Where we got today, it was not talent, it was all about hard work.
So true. So true. That's a great point. There's a book out there, speaking of books, I think is a paraphrase. Talent is overrated, I think, or something like that, where it talks about that. It's been suggested to me many, many times, but that's what made me think about that. That's why I just said that. So it's safe to say that you had a baby and the baby was basically a part of you building your business. That's
Yep.
the bottom line.
Yep.
Didn't matter because you were already involved, business was building, and there's no slowing that down. And so, wow, yeah, that's fascinating. It didn't, one of the hardest things for me, Joni, was my identity of like, oh, how do I how do I not feel guilty about being dad and not going to play with them all the time and also trying to build a business. And we've done a lot of growth in that category. So it's got better. But it wasn't easy. I mean, that was
Yeah.
tough. That was
Yeah,
tough.
it is tough. And I went through the same thing, right? I mean, I remember, once when my child actually went to preschool and she's like, mommy, I want you to come, have lunch with me. And I think this part is actually in my book, but so I scheduled lunch to have with her and things got so crazy and busy at the office and I totally spaced it out.
Oh,
I did not go to that lunch. And after that, I felt like the worst parent in the world, like guilt, like, oh my gosh, like you just broke her little heart. You didn't
mm,
show up to lunch. And the principal's like calling me like, hey Joni, Mila's up here. She's waiting for you. And at that point, Manny, I was like, you need to stop.
wow.
Like, what is more important? Right. And so yeah, at the beginning, it was a lot of grinding and it was okay, right? They were smaller and but really like once that moment happened, I'm like, man, like this what's worth it right now is your children. You don't get that time back.
Mm.
So but yeah, I mean, a lot of guilt along the way, but kind of like you, right? We've kind of had to refocus ourselves and put our priorities straight and yeah,
So you're saying, would you do it differently then?
definitely would do it
You would
differently.
really?
Yeah, I definitely would. I would have spent more time with them at home. Because and I saw this. So my husband and I took an entire month off. Um, and really it was kind of a test to say, okay, like where is our business at right now? Do we have the systems? Do we have the processes in place? Right. And so when we made the decision to take a year off, we said, okay, we have a 1 year to get everything in place, right? Like let's delegate everything off our plates that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, so that we can fully have this 1 month off. And we did. We spent that whole year taking everything off our plate, developing systems and processes for it. And June came around and we took our entire month off. We went to Hawaii, spent time with the kids there. Then we actually went backpacking in New Mexico. The kids loved it because we didn't have cell phones. So,
Mm,
it was just really one-on-one time with the kids, right? And it felt uncomfortable because we were so ingrained with working and driving the business, right? It's like an addict, like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I need that phone. I need to call the office to see what's happening, right? But finally, after like a couple days of that, like we're like, all right, well, let's relax, let's enjoy our trip. Came back and the team did amazing. They actually drove the business, they ran the business, nothing happened. And so I'm like, man, like looking back when I had my children, I'm like, if I would have just had that thought process, okay, let's get things in place in order first,
Mm,
right? That way you can have that time off. Because again, you don't get that time back.
yeah.
My
Yeah.
kids still remember the month off that we take. They talk
Wow.
about it all the time,
That's
and that
amazing.
will live with them forever.
How old were they when that was going on?
So Milo was 4,
Wow.
and Lucas was 8.
Wow. So if I hear this correctly, the part of the lesson in there is if you have a business, how can you get it to a point where it's systematized and processed and SOP'd out faster so that you don't have to be the one involved? Is that
Exactly. And I mean, it could be your rock, meaning that's, what you're going to make sure that you get done for that quarter or that year. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it,
mm-hmm.
right? You delegate it off to your team, somebody on your team that can help you take that on. For example, like in my team, when we took that month off, okay, I delegated to certain people, certain leaders in the team to go ahead and create a process for that.
Mm. Interesting. So you had them create the process for it because they were the ones already doing the work.
Exactly.
And
They're the
but
ones that are the day to day, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, even if I develop the process, they're probably gonna, no, Joni, that's not right. Like, I'm not working in the day to day. They are. So have them create the process. Yeah, you can approve it and make sure it looks correct. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that are doing it.
So this gets interesting because I feel like there's just this wave nowadays of, I really want to unpack this whole thing right now, what you're saying is, and how important it is. But I feel like there's this wave of solopreneurs out there. You probably have heard that term a lot, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, it's so, and there's people out there promoting the shit out of it. It's like you know, run a business on your own, do everything your way. And it sounds very compelling. I mean, shit, I bought into it a couple of times. I'm like, that kind of sounds cool, you know? And then you watch a video on somebody and they're making, you know, 150, 200 grand a month. And you're like, as a solopreneur? Okay, well, let's see, you know? And so maybe this doesn't apply to that type of business model where there is, or maybe it does, but from the point of deciding that you need to do this whole process thing, and obviously in your business case, it's you have team members that were a part of this, but for somebody else that might not have that big of an organization, is that still applicable, Joni? Is it still applicable to the person that has a few people maybe helping them out to systematize and automate and do things like that?
Yeah. And honestly, like you don't have to have the employees to do with it. You can outsource to other companies who have companies that do that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I had a company come in to really map out everything in my business to the point where, okay, we can go ahead and create SOPs for it, right? I've hired a fractional HR company, right? Because I didn't want to hire a full-blown HR company in my organization. So there are companies out there that you can outsource to be able to do these things so you can focus on what's important for you.
Makes sense. Love it. So the application of building out the process and you said it took a year.
A year.
Like a year. What the
A
hell
year.
takes a year to do this? Is it that big of a shit show? I mean,
There's a lot of moving parts in property management and in business in general, but we were also running multiple companies.
mm,
So, this was really getting everything for all multiple companies.
I see.
But honestly, like, and I think I mentioned to you at the event last week is I probably work about 30 hours a week, right? And it's because I've got dialed in systems in every one of my companies, the 5 companies that I have. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can be out there hanging out with Manny,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Totally.
Because this is in place. So yeah, it took a while, but once it's there, game changer.
Right. So that's like the ultimate leverage point then, in your opinion, in terms of being able to like get out of the business. Is that fair to say?
100%.
Yeah. So so if we walked back in time, what would be, whether there were people helping you or it was you a part of it, because I'm sure you were, and the team was a part of it, what are some tactical things that someone can do to start that process? Like if you were to literally say, somebody walked up to you today and say, hey, I need to do what you just said, what would be the first 3 to 5 things you would tell them that need to happen in order for this process to start making itself work?
Number one, you got to change your mindset to say, you know what, like, I need to let go of this crap. Like,
Oh,
I am
so
not
true.
the smartest person. So read books, listen to podcasts, whatever it is to get you in that right frame of mind. Right. And the second thing is start to delegate off your plate. And the easiest to do that is write out a list of all the items that you do on a day-to-day basis, right? And maybe put into 2 different buckets. Maybe have a $10 an hour bucket and a $200 an hour bucket, right? And on that list that you create, put them in the buckets. And the items that are on that $10 an hour bucket, those are the items you want to delegate off your plate immediately so that you can focus on the $200, the things in your business that are going to move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. Okay, so let's say we get that. We're there. And now we have the list. We got them in buckets. We've outsourced that. Then what do we do to start building out a process or a system? And how does that whole thing look or live, or what needs to happen then? I heard you say something earlier where you relied on the person to build out the process because they're the ones doing it every day. I mean, this shit can get complicated fast. And so I'm curious on like, how does one continue to march that drum that you just started us off with there and further that whole thing?
For entrepreneurs, I think this one's tough because I work with a lot of business owners and they say, everything's in my head, right? Like all the processes and everything that goes on in my business is in my head, right? And I've been there, I've done that. And early on, what I had to do was literally I had to record everything, that I did day to day. and I would hand that off to my executive assistant. My executive assistant would take that and transcribe it, right? And then whoever is creating that process, I'll use that to create the process. Okay. Yeah. And I think it works for a lot, because I'm telling you right now, entrepreneurs that are listening to this are like, yeah, well, everything is in my head, right?
Totally.
I get that. But it's got to come out of your head. And so if it's easiest, then record it so somebody can transcribe that into a process.
Okay. And then the process becomes a document that you have now. And it's like, this is what happens first. This is what happens second. This is what happens third. And then what do you do with that then? Does that become the living, breathing document that becomes the usable version until it gets iterated and optimized again? And then Sally Sue takes it over and it's like, now Sally Sue's responsible for this process. It's like, what's the furthering of that?
Yeah, you document it, obviously, right? And you should have some sort of a file vault. We have a file vault that all of our processes live in. And anytime a process is changed, we go in there, we edit it, right? And then also anytime a new employee comes in, we make sure that they know where the processes live as well, so that they have access to that, when they need that.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we have also what's called a task management system. And so, once we've got the process kind of lined out, what happens first, second, third, and fourth in our task management, we also put it in our task management. So that way, if any employee, any virtual assistant is doing maybe a make ready process, they know, okay, this is what need to happen first, second, third, fourth. And once it happens, then okay, get kicked off to the leasing department, right? And so all of that lives in our CRM, basically.
Makes sense. Now, do you advise someone as something is better than nothing? So, for example, if somebody needs to delegate a silly task that's being done for $10 an hour, and they've got maybe, let's just say, an executive assistant, right? An executive assistant is doing multiple things, and this other new $10 a task can be done by the executive assistant, but maybe is not their wheelhouse. Do you advise them pawning that off to the executive assistant as well, just to get it off their plate, because that person can go and make the $500,000 decision and do the things that they need to do that are more profitable for the company? Or do you say, let's go find somebody else now to do that other specific task or job that is that $10 an hour thing?
Yeah. So my advice is, if you're trying to keep lean, then yes, utilize that executive assistant. Yeah. I mean, it might not be her exact skill, his or her skill set, right? But if it's something that can easily be transferred to them and they can do 100%, there's no need for you to hire somebody else to do that task, right? Then as you grow and scale a little bit more, then you can specialize it a little bit. And maybe as you have more work, you can hire somebody else for that, right?
Understood.
But at the beginning, yes, I think a lot of times our executive assistants or our first virtual assistants wears many hats. They're more of a generalist because they are really truly trying to help you unload a lot of things that you're doing on a day-to-day, so that you can do higher level stuff.
Makes sense. So let me share with you something that I have going on right now with what I'm looking at. I'm curious on your feedback on this too, because you're very well versed in this, and I do want you to share a little bit about the virtual assistant paradigm and the power of that. Obviously, you built your companies on that back, which is awesome. But I'm looking to, I've got a guy that's already helping me, but I want to hand him some more stuff. I'm on a digital side, and he's really good. He's extremely smart. He's hungry, and he likes to figure things out on his own, which is everything to me, because it's like, we're there for you and we'll do stuff. But at the same time, it's like when you go figure out solutions to problems that haven't been brought up yet, that's amazing. However, he's overseas, and I know you do work out of the US, but I have and again, please break my paradigm here. I'm nervous to give him access to full passwords and stuff, because there's my concern about cybersecurity and breaches and things of getting hacked and access to my codes and stuff like that, because I don't know how their infrastructure is over there and whatnot. If he has passwords to do stuff for me on socials and these other areas, am I just being ridiculous when I say that? Or is that a valid concern that should be addressed some way, somehow, that you're aware of that might solve that problem?
So I will tell you, your in-house employees can do the same damn crap, right? And actually, I've had that happen in my own companies with an in-house employee. Okay. And so honestly, hiring overseas a lot. I mean, they're just, it's their culture is not like that. I mean, they are honest, they're true, they're trustworthy. I think as time goes on, you develop that, business relationship with them. We have never had an issue. My point is that it can happen here. Yes,
Right.
it's something that you should be, make sure that you have things in place. For example, like if you let go of that employee, quickly be able to, disable their access so they don't have access to your items, right? Change those passwords. Just be smart about it. I don't think it has to be where you're concerned about it to not hire that person, because honestly, Manny, it could happen to your in-house employees as well.
Right. It's everywhere. Okay, good.
So
Yeah.
don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Honestly, don't overthink it, right?
Thanks for the reminder. No, it's good. Listen, I love those reminders too. Sometimes I'm like, shit, I'm overthinking it. Let's just do it, And sometimes you just need to be triggered. It's just a reminder more than it needs to be something that's newly taught. Okay. All right. So let's talk about that virtual team member. I think that's what you call them, right? Is that what you call them?
We actually call them, so most people know it's virtual assistants is what most know them as. I like to call them remote team members, because truly and honestly, they are part of your team. Okay. So they're not virtual, they're human beings, right? They just work from home in a different country for a fraction of the cost of what it costs for an in-house employee. If you hired an in-house employee. So I call them remote team members because they truly, honestly are part of your team, and you have to treat them as part of your team, right? And so, when you, and I don't know if you have specific questions, but when you hire them, like include them in your meetings, include them in anything that you do, because they have brilliant ideas. I mean, they are talented, Manny, and really can help drive your business just with their ideas.
Of course. Yeah, no, I don't doubt that. So talk to us about, because I know you're really well versed in this category. Obviously, you've built your companies with remote team members, and also are very active in having a company that is all based around that as well. So if there's a person to speak to this, I think there's a lot of, is it judgment's the right word? I don't know if that's the right word, but I think you hopefully understand what I'm trying to say there. There's concern maybe about hiring remote team members that are not native US and are overseas for abilities to, produce at the same capacity levels or whatnot. But obviously you've seen the success. So what's the paradigm shift as well there, maybe as well as, how to look at this differently, in the sense that you could get a lot for what you're looking to get out of a potential remote team member. Maybe just, you're the expert there. So I'd love for you to share what you think about that.
So I think that, fear has a lot of play into that. Like and probably the same as what you thought, right? Like, oh my gosh, like somebody working in a different country, what if they hack into my systems, that sort of thing, right? And then just the whole concept of working from home, like misconceptions of, no, all of my people have always worked in the office, right? And I don't want people working from home because of the productivity, those sorts of things. But if COVID taught us anything, it was that right there, where you can pretty much do anything from your home, right? And a lot of businesses actually grew more so during that time because their people were not focused out there driving to and from work and not getting work done at the office. And so I think just the misconception of it all, of like, yes, it can happen. And the other thing is, like, I think a lot of times people look at virtual assistants as only doing like tasky oriented stuff. So, emails and, answering phones, all of that. And they really are talented. It's all about finding the right person for the right seat. And I think if you focused on that part of it, then it's a no-brainer, right? Why wouldn't you hire somebody overseas that is a lot cheaper than what you could in-house? And think about the liability as well. When you hire an in-house employee, now you have, to pay payroll taxes, insurance, benefits, all of that adds up. So even for like an admin coming into your workplace, probably is going to cost you about $50,000 to $60,000 when you factor everything in there, right? You can get the same talented person overseas for a fraction of that. You can probably get 2 to 4 of those people. So think about that for a second. How much more can you get done with 2 to 4 employees versus that one, right? How
Right.
much you can grow and scale, how much more efficient you can be with your processes. And so once I got my mindset right to say, okay, yeah, like I see how this can be possible, and I don't have to be afraid of it. It can work. I got to the point where I wanted to put virtual assistants in my entire company, right? If it didn't need a handshake, then, or if it didn't need a license, I was putting them in place.
You remind me of the thought of, um, and again, because I think even me, like I'm always one that's admitting how I formally thought about certain things. Like there's always these contexts that we have around how we see things, right? So the context in this case could easily be, well, they're overseas. What the hell do they know, right? It's third world country, or it's less than, or it's lower than the U.S. per se. And we assume that because that's the case, that these people don't have brains and they don't think, or they're incapable of doing
Right.
a job, when that couldn't be the furthest from the truth. Like they're, like you said, real humans. They can learn. They probably went to school. They probably have degrees to some extent, right? And there's certain things that they do really well. And we've completely fooled ourselves about what could possibly be done there just because we have a context around that. So anyway,
100%. Yeah.
it's
And it's fun. And entrepreneurs come to me a lot. They're like, well, I don't have time to train. Well, if you don't have time to train and develop, your VAs, you hiring an in-house employee is going to be the same thing, right? Then what's the point? You just lost
right.
money hiring that employee because you don't want to take your head out of your butt and develop your team and train them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you develop and train them just as you would everybody else, the VAs and your in-house employees, man, you guys will be unstoppable. But I think right there, a lot of entrepreneurs don't focus on the training and the development. I spend tons of time with my team, my remote team, developing them. They are reading books together with us. They are listening to podcasts. They're, in our leadership meetings, really developing them as leaders. Okay. And that's really what we need to be focused on.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. What are some of those things that you do to develop them as leaders, though? I'm very curious about that because I just get curious about like the specific of that process. Obviously, reading podcasts is a part of it. Do you guys do anything else like activity-wise? Are you thinking about something that is critical for them to become leader? Like, how do you define that part, right? I get really curious about that because obviously it's a massive topic around the world, but I think everybody has a little different flavor to that.
Yeah, and so I told you that we run EOS in our companies, and I think also getting them involved in that process and how that operates. A lot of times, like what we notice is that our employees are shy. They have really good ideas, but they don't necessarily want to speak up, especially the remote team members, because they don't think that they're valid, or they think their idea is stupid, right? And so we ask for feedback, like, hey guys, like I want to know what you're thinking on this. Like we have a roundtable where, and they have idea books. And so everybody is open to share their ideas, and we try to take 1 or 2 of those a year to implement in our business. And I think that's extremely important to develop your leaders, is say, hey, like, let me hear your ideas, right? Don't be afraid to talk about it, because then once they start to talk about them, man, like they don't shut up sometimes. You're like, okay, no more ideas, right? But I think that's how you develop your leaders.
Yeah, amazing. Something that just randomly shot through my brain, which is what is exciting about this. I don't know why it came up, but the signal said hard conversations, and so it just made me think about your place of, and I think it was partially contributed by something that you always tell the story about, how you had a bad employee that hung around too long and then it cost you a lot of money. That story always comes out. But at what point did you either understand the power of having the very hard conversation, which can be the firing conversation, which can be the other big business decision conversations, maybe customer conversations. There's a book out there, Crucial Conversations, I think is the name of it. But the idea is, how did you evolve in that capacity with having those really difficult dialogues that were necessary? necessity to be able to get the business going where it needs to go?
I think just getting out of your comfort zone and doing it, right?
Mm.
So I'll tell a story when I was knocking on pre-foreclosure doors. I mean, talk about like getting out of your comfort zone and having these difficult conversations. I'll tell you a story real quick. So my first house that I knocked on, he was about, I don't know, 6'5", 250 pounds, big dude, right? And so I go up to the door, and I was always the one that talked because I was the relationship builder. My husband, he was the numbers guy, right? And so I go up to the door and I say, "Hey, so and so, like I'm here. I noticed that your house is going to go up for auction." And this guy looks at me, and he says, "You have the audacity to come knocking on my door. You better get off my property before I shoot you."
Ooh.
This is the first day in Texas. So I'm like, "Oh crap, welcome to Texas," right? And so at that moment, I was like, man, like, is this what it's gonna be like? And so I remember calling my coach and mentor at that time, and I said, "Hey, Charles," I said, "you never will believe what happened. This guy yelled at me. He said he was going to shoot me if I didn't come off his property." And he was like, "Joni, like, take a step back and, take a deep breath. And hey, this guy is not going to do anything to you. Okay. Just pick up your big girl panties and move on to the next door." So I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So my point is a lot, like, I think that for me, especially, it was me getting out of my comfort zone and doing the things that maybe I wasn't comfortable doing, right? Because eventually you do more and more of that, it just becomes natural to you.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't like when it comes to hard conversations, I can have the most difficult conversations, but it's because I put myself out there,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And I practiced
Mm.
a lot, right? I failed a lot. But at the end of the day, like, I didn't back down. I got back up and let's go do it again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that bothers you or upsets you as an entrepreneur, even though you know you have to be stoic in your day to day in terms of dealing with adversities and challenges in the business? Is there something that comes along ever that bothers you or really disturbs you, or is that sort of part of that process where it's like I'm immune to that nowadays?
Yeah, no, I actually thought about this yesterday, as I was having a review with one of my employees, and giving her feedback on what she needs, what she was doing well on, because I think that's important to let them know what they're doing well, but then also things that maybe she needed to improve on. And making excuses, I think, is the one thing,
Mm.
that bothers me. And it's hard because I'm like, man, like, I just want you to own up to it, right? Like, own it. Um, Let me know how you're going to improve it, and that's it. Like, just own it. There's so many people out there that make excuses and don't own it. You're never going to get anywhere with not owning it.
Hmm. Absolutely. So is this um, a conversation that you had with her and that you okay, so I'm very curious about this. So like do you walk around on eggshells because you feel like you have to be politically correct nowadays and there's a worry about people hearing something they don't want to hear, or there's the thought about um um being talked to in a way where they don't agree with it, and because you're trying to communicate as honest as you can that it affects the risk, or it puts the business at risk to some extent? Like, does that cross your mind at all nowadays? Like, how do you go through that part of the process?
I think if you asked me that, 5 years ago, I would say yes. Like,
Hmm.
because as you grow and scale your business, like, yeah, you got to be careful on what you say, right? You have to keep business, business, personal, personal, and not mix the two, right? And I think early on in my career, like, I mixed the two, right? And so you just have to be mindful of that. And I mean, now that I have my leadership team, I don't have to deal with the day to day as much anymore. I don't have to really deal with the employees much anymore. Yes, I do make my rounds and hey, good morning, how are you doing today? But I kind of let my leadership team do the hard work and dirty work.
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. Look at what you've done. You built a good company there, Joni. How
Thank
awesome,
you,
how
Manny.
awesome is that? Man, man, oh man, oh man. All right. So I get you back to your day. What do we miss? Is there anything out there that's on the top of your heart or mind that you think is necessary that you want to share that's important? I mean, I tried to cover some ground here, some quick ground at that, but I'm imagining you got a lot of extra thought or something that's applicable to somebody, or it might be helpful that's at the top of your mind, maybe,
I
hopefully.
know. I think we really did cover a lot of ground today, talking about the VA business and a lot of entrepreneurial stuff, right? But at the end of the day, I say again, just get out there and do it. Like, don't overthink it. And that's going to kind of be my motto: is don't overthink it, right? Because I think a lot of times that's what we want to do. Yeah, and the fear thing, whatever that is, to motivate you to not let you, because our minds can play games with us, right? At times. And there's times where sometimes, yeah, like I need to put on a quick podcast to motivate me right now because my day's not going well. Okay.
Right.
And so yeah, I think that would be the last thing I would say.
Amazing. What are you promoting? Where can we find you? Is there anything you want to try to sell or give away, or anything that we need to know about where to find you?
Yeah, so I do have a book out. It's called The Choice is Yours: Balancing Success as a Wife, Mom, and Entrepreneur. So if you wanted to get that book, it's on Amazon. If you want to send me an email as well, happy to give you a book as well, a signed copy of that. You can also find me on Facebook at Joni Wolfswinkle. So tough last name, but I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes. And
sure
on
will.
Instagram as Joni M. Wolf.
Joni, do you want to give your email away? You said
Sure.
okay.
It is Joni at trueworklogistics.com.
I know. I like it. All right. Last question for you before you get back out to that crazy Houston, Texas area, having some fun out there doing your thing. What does always in the grow mean to you?
Always in the grow is obviously growing yourself, not just in numbers, but yourself as a person, an individual, you bettering yourself.
I love it. I love it. Girl, you inspire me. You really do. I'm very blessed to get to see you once a month and be a part of your genius and learn from you. And we finally made it happen, by the way. We finally made the podcast.
Yes.
You guys have no idea how many times we tried to do this.
And thanks to your wife for booking that. So,
talk about delegating.
Yep.
She's crushing
delegating and support. So
she's as we all know, we all have that spouse of ours that we feel that way about. She's and she loves it. She absolutely loves that part of life and doing that job, and it just makes her excited. I was like, you're the right person to do this. You need to do this. I told her what was going on. You start doing this now. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do that. So that's amazing.
All right,
yeah.
Manny, it's been amazing. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. See you in a couple weeks. God bless.
All right.
Appreciate you. Have a great day over there. All right.